Hello, I'm doing well, and I hope that you are doing well also. This is a time when we are really praying hard, aren't we? Passionately, even. And that is good. Maybe it'll teach us to do that all the time. I want to give you this lesson to encourage you in the Word. His word is first in my life, and I love sharing it with you. And I appreciate it when you get online and listen to what His word has to say. I may bungle it up, but His word is first, and it is true, and it is uh, a foundation for everything we believe in. Okay, so last week we did the um, the sandwich, and this week I want you to read another sandwich. These sandwiches help us with the sandwich in the Melchizedek section, but also it's a snippet. And I enjoy snippets, and we may go outside the text, and we're not in Hebrews with this snippet, except for the fact that in Hebrews, in the Melchizedek section, we have a sandwich. And we're looking at sandwiches now. So, what I'd like you to do, if you haven't done it already, because I often recommend to the people who are with me in my Bible study that you read all the papers first, and then when we get together, you've got it. You'll get more out of it because you'll be familiar with the text we're working with. So, but if you haven't read the sandwich, I suggest you put the pause button on so that you can read the sandwich and then come back and I'll be ready to go through it with you. Okay, so pause it if you have to. Well, I'm glad you're back with me. Some of you stuck with me. So we're going to look at this sandwich and see what's going on here. We looked at a sandwich last week that was phenomenal. It was about the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. Remember, it started out with the priests and the scribes getting together, trying to figure out when they were going to get rid of Jesus, and they decided not now because there's the Passover feast, and there'd be too many people here. And that story got interrupted by another story about a woman who brings a very expensive perfume to anoint Jesus, and we hear that because she did this, her story would be told with the gospel all through the ages. So and her name isn't even given because that's unimportant, but what she did is important. So when she does this, people are upset that money could have been used for the poor. But Jesus says it's used for my burial, which is really, really important that he says this because this is going to trigger something in Judas's mind. He has already, heard Jesus predict his death 3 times. But when Jesus predicted his death 3 times, he used the words Son of Man rather than I. He doesn't say I will die. He uses a word that is an idiom for man. And so it was like this. A man is going to suffer and die. And it wasn't until this moment when Jesus says she is using this to anoint me for my burial. That's when it all clicks for Judas. And that's why the story is here, and it's followed up by Judas going to these scribes and priests and telling them, and they they send him out so that he can betray Jesus at an opportune time. So their whole idea of waiting till after the Passover is cast off because they've got a good thing, they think. We will have Judas uh, betray him at a time when the people are not really around, and that's at night. So we have this sandwich that ties these two stories together more intricately than if we had juxtaposed them, put the one story first and the other story second. It also means that we're to contrast certain characters. And the contrast is between this woman, what she does, and Judas, what he does. And that's phenomenal. So if you're ever telling the story about Jesus' betrayal, don't forget about this woman. Jesus wants her story told. And her story is told in the middle. Also, to see the contrast is that Judas sold Jesus for money. And that word money is used in the last section. But she gave money for Jesus. And that word money is used in the middle section concerning her. So listen again. Judas sold Jesus for money, but she gave money for Jesus. I think that's a great way, and that wasn't from me. That's some other book told me to phrase it that way because it's a good way to think about them both and the contrast between them. Judas sold Jesus for money. She gave money for Jesus. In this sandwich, the betrayal of all the disciples is brought out, the one we're going to be looking at today. So it's not just Judas, but it's going to show how all the disciples are going to be part of the betrayal. In the other sandwich from last week, the body of Jesus was focused on. The woman anoints Jesus's body. Remember that? That's in the middle section of the sandwich from last week. And it's in verse 14, verse 8, chapter 14, verse 8. In this sandwich, Jesus gives his body, same word, for sinners. And that's in the middle section. In fact, it's in verse 22. By the way, I did a typo here. You see the first 24, verse 24? It's the first one. Then it has 24 again. Well, that's supposed to be 25. Can you correct that for me, please? Because we'll need to be looking at these verses. Both of these things about Jesus's body are both in the middle, right? Mark provides the key to understanding this whole sandwich in the center. The whole sandwich's key is right there in the center. Because Jesus' self-sacrifice is contrasted with the disciples' infidelity. On either side of Jesus' talking about his body and his blood are going to be given for sinners. On either side, we have the disciples. And on the first one, it's talking about Judas at the top of the first piece of bread for our sandwich. And the second piece of bread is that all of them. So, did you notice that we have the word all? You probably didn't, because all is a very small word and you don't think about it. But when you're going to the epistles, when um, Paul, his epistles have an awful lot of alls, A-L-L. So get used to this. We have a lot of alls here in this story. In verse 23, it tells us all drink from the cup. In verse 27, it tells us all fall away. In verse 31, all swear allegiance. And then in the last one, all fled in verse, but that's later on, verse 50, not in the sandwich, but all fled. This is a table of grace, for it is attended by cowards. This table is attended by cowards and traitors. Not merely Judas will betray Jesus. All of them will. Did you notice that in verse 27 we have a prophecy from the Old Testament, and it says this: I will strike down the shepherd, says Yahweh, and the sheep will be scattered. That is a prophecy of what will happen. Yes, the Christ will be struck down, the shepherd, but the sheep that surround him will be scattered. And that's exactly what happens at Gethsemane, isn't it? They all run, they all flee in verse 50. And then he tells them, but after I have been raised, he gives them such hope. You would think that they remember these words, wouldn't you? But after he dies, they forgot that he said, after I am raised. He says, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. That's exactly the words we learned 2 weeks ago. We heard 2 weeks ago from the young man who was at the tomb. He said, he will go ahead of you. So here, exactly what will be said is said by Jesus. He's predicting, and his prediction comes through. So go there, he says, and tell Peter. Because Peter's the one who needs those words, isn't he? By placing communion between the betrayal of the disciples, the two betrayals, Judas up top and all the disciples at the bottom, Mark conveys that the many in the middle include the disciples. Now, where did we get the many? That's at the end of verse 24. And he says, this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. And the disciples are part of the many, aren't they? Not just because they are sinners, but because they were a part of the betrayal, aren't they? Okay, so there's our sandwich. So remember that in the middle, the important part is the communion, the first communion. It was a Passover. Now listen to this. It was the Passover, and who goes to a Passover feast? Families. Yes. Now remember, the women have come up to Jerusalem from Galilee. They'd been following him all along. They were his followers, which means his disciples. And they're in Jerusalem too. So would Jesus leave them out? No. This room is a huge room, much bigger than the need for 12 apostles. And so they are being zeroed in. So our author is just directing the camera to just Jesus and his apostles. But if you zoomed out, there's the possibility, and I would say, along with many others, scholars, that there is probably a room filled with people because Passover was a family affair. The disciples and apostles had um, families, wives, children, and they would probably, but the author in each gospel zeroes in on Jesus and the disciples. So think about it. Now, let me give you a little bit more reason why I've come to this conclusion, although I'm not the only one. There's scads of scholars who have also suggested that there were others there. Number one, the room. So let's go to Luke to see something about that room. Go to Luke 22, 11 to 12. Luke 22, 11 to 12. Okay. 22, 11 to 12. And it says this. Remember, he sends out his disciples to get a room for him. And you shall say to the owner of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Disciples were both men and women in the book of Luke. In fact, Luke purposefully shows us that the women were disciples. And he will show you a large, furnished upper room. Prepare it there. For only 13 men, they need a large room. And they left and found everything just as he had told them, a large room. Now, this is called the upper room. And watch what happens about that room in Acts chapter 1. Acts chapter 1. And when you get there, go to verses 12 to 15. 12 to 15. Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey away. When they entered the city, they went up to the upper room. Now, when we were talking about it at first, it says a room, right? In 22, 11, and 12. They went, he orders a room. But now it says the room. If something was introduced early, it's called a something. But if it comes again, it's called the something. And that's what it says here, the upper room where they are staying. So they keep that upper room all along. Now, it's a large room, and look who are in this large room. He names the 11 apostles that are left, where they are staying. That is Peter, and John, and James, and Andrew, and Philip, and Thomas, Bartholomew, and Matthew, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James, not the Judas that betrayed him. These all with one mind were continually devoting themselves to prayer along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. So we got all the disciples, all the women. We're not just talking about the 12 apostles, all the disciples, both men and women, and Jesus' brothers, are all in this room praying. That's a big room, much too big for a small group having a dinner. And so, and with the fact that these women had come with Jesus, why would he leave them out? But it zeroes in. So those are the reasons why I've come to the conclusion that the Last Supper may have, had the disciples and Jesus close together, and the others were part of another group on reclining. But there may have been more than the 13 there. Okay? Just keep an open mind and think about it. Okay, so let's go to, we are not going through the story of the battle again this week. We're just going to review a little bit and then go on where we haven't been. Remember that this chiasm, from Genesis 14, verses 1 to 9, is creatively arranged, not chronologically. And we've talked about that. We mean, so the very first part of our story, which happened 14 years before the battle, the present battle in the story, that's in the middle. It's background information and what happened when these kings came back. So it occurred, the first thing occurred 14 years earlier. They had conquered over these kings and left with a bundle of booty, and with the rule that these kings were to pay tribute. But and they had done this, but after 12 years, they decide not to do this. And so in the 13th year, they revolted. And in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer comes along with his 3 other kings and soldiers. And they come down the eastern side of the Jordan River along what is called the King's Highway. They swoop down and conquer over 6 more towns with their kings, and they're enumerated here in the center, which brings us up to the present, which is the battle. And remember, the battle is told twice from 2 different points of view. So we don't have a battle and then this section about the background, and then the battle again, a second battle, or really a third battle. No. Because the battle is being told from 2 points of view. So it's 2 tellings of the same battle from 2 different points of view. Remember, the Fertile Crescent kings prepare for battle against the kings of Canaan, eastern Canaan, at the Sea of Salt. And then down the bottom, the DCBA part tells that battle again only from the kings of the point of view of the kings of Canaan, because the kings of Canaan are listed again, and they set their ranks against them, the Fertile Crescent kings, in the valley of Siddim, against the kings of the Fertile Crescent. And then it gives us an odd bit of information, because we could have counted 4 kings against 5. So keep this in mind, because he has a purpose for telling us that there were 9 kings. So we figure out, even without being told, who wins. In the middle, we're told that the Fertile Crescent kings beat the kings along the King's Highway before they even get to Sodom, Gomorrah, and the others listed. This tells us how formidable this enemy is. And we're told this so that we can realize how formidable our God is. There ain't nothing our God can't do. And our God can do whatever. And so we don't have to be afraid. I'm not saying you definitely won't get that disease that's out there. No, I'm not saying that. I am saying that God will go through everything with you. He is the great I am, and we can trust him. Remember what he says, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what Jesus tells us to pray. And I'm praying that your will be done. And so I can sit back and not be fearful. I'm cautious. I do what they tell me to do because I'm listening to wisdom. But I'm not sitting here in fear. I trust my God to do the right thing. So how do we know that who wins? Well, the author gives us clues, doesn't he? You remember that? The kings of Canaan, their names are not given, are they, in the second listing, which tells us that they're not the important ones. The kings from over the Fertile Crescent are the important ones, and their names are given a second time. But this second time, the kings of Canaan, their names are not given. They are unimportant because they lost. A second reason why we can tell that the kings of the Fertile Crescent won is that the kings of the Fertile Crescent are listed first and last in this chiasm. Now, the middle part is most important. The next most important are the outer edges of a chiasm, the A and the A. And who's in the A and the A position? Well, the kings from the Fertile Crescent. Then we notice that 4 kings against 5. Well, the 4 kings are listed first. And who are they? They're the Fertile Crescent kings. So that's another hint that they won because the 4 kings are listed first. Okay, so the next page, with some of us, we saw some of the things, but let's go over this. Since we've already been told in cryptic form who won, the author proceeds to talk about who lost. Well, let's see what it says. Now, the Valley of Siddim. Now, I think we talked about this last week. Notice the word Siddim. In the Hebrew, it would be S-D-D-M. So circle that word. Is pit after pit of tar. And when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, they flung themselves therein, while those who remained fled to the hill country. Looks as though the kings took care of themselves and let their soldiers go off finding a place to hide. Now they, who's the they? That's the kings from over the Fertile Crescent, took. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to circle the word took all the way through, because some people are going to take and other people are going to take. We're going to see who takes, and some people are going to give. So now the kings of the Fertile Crescent took all the property of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food and went away. And they took, so we're given a second thing. They took all the property and went away. Now they took Lot and all his property. The son of Abram's brother. That's telling us about Lot, which we already knew because we studied chapter 13, didn't we? And learned all about Lot. And that was in preparation for this battle so that we would know why Lot is even in Sodom. He left Abram and went away. Again, we're told they went away. For he had settled in Sodom. Now, Sodom is S-D-M, which looks almost exactly like S-D-D-M. Because in the Hebrew, the only way to see that it's D-D is just a little dot in the middle of the D, which tells us we're to double that D. So there's not much difference, is there, between Siddim and Sodom? And so that's our inclusio around it to tell us that is being separated from the chiasm in the previous section and from the next section, because the next section is about the battle. So let's look at it. One who escaped came and told Abram and the Hebrew. He was dwelling by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner. Okay, we wonder why these names are given, but they are covenant. They are part of a covenant between Abram and these people. And the three names are given. If you remember, dwelling by the oaks of Mamre. In other words, Mamre owned the oaks where Abraham was. So he's the number one, and Eshcol is number two, and brother of Aner is number three. Now, watch what the author does with these names. Let's slide down to verse 24 at the end of our story. Nothing for me, said Abram to the king of Sodom, only what the lads have consumed, the food, and the share of the men who went with me. Who went with them? Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them take their share. Where'd you see those words? Well, at the beginning of this section. So what is the author doing? Putting an inclusio around it to say, I want you to think of this section as one whole section. But look how he does it. If you look up here, to notice the names and then compare it to the names down at the bottom. And what do you see? You see a reversal? Yeah, there's a reversal of the names, which is like a mirror image of the names. And that's a fun kind of inclusio to watch for if the author has been a little bit more creative and reversed what he said in the first part of the inclusio. So let's go back. They were Abram's covenant allies. When Abram heard that his brother had been taken prisoner, he drew out his retainers, his house-born slaves, 18 and 300. There's 318. And went in pursuit as far as Dan. That's far to the north of Israel. He split up his forces against them in the night. Good time to do it, when they were sleeping. He and his servants, and struck them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is to the north of Damascus. That's even farther north. But he, Abram, returned or retrieved all the property. Remember the property that was mentioned that the kings of the Fertile Crescent had taken? Now he retrieves all the property. And he also returned or retrieved his brother Lot and his property, and also the women and the other people. So the women were included. Number one, because God thinks women are important. And but also because women are going to be important in the story of Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we're being told that Lot's wife and daughters were brought back also. Then we go to a section which is our sandwich, which is in the inclusio. So we have the inclusio and then the sandwich in there. So let's look at the sandwich. It starts out with the king of Sodom went out. The king of Sodom went out to meet Abram upon his return from the strike against Chedorlaomer and against the kings. So Chedorlaomer, or cheddar cheese, is the top king of the four kings. We saw that before. To meet him upon his return from the strike against Chedorlaomer and against the kings that were with him, to the valley of Shiva, that is, the valley of the king's valley. Now we're told in 2 Samuel that the King's Valley was a plain outside of Jerusalem. So it's probably between the Oaks of Mamre and Jerusalem, where the King Melchizedek lives. Okay, so they get there. Now I want you to stop, because I have a job for you to do. And you may have done it already, but what I want you to do is take a look on the first page and this page, the first page of the Melchizedek story, and circle the word king all the way through, the whole thing. So put it on pause, count them up, circle them and count them up, and then come back to me, unless you did it last week and you already counted it up. So count them up. Okay, you back again with me? Well, if you counted right, you would have counted 28. 28 times the word king. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, you may be saying to yourself, but I only counted 27. But if you go to verse 18, it says Melchizedek, doesn't it? Well, Melch means king. So all the other words that you circled are the word Melch in the Hebrew. So you would count his name, Melch, as one of them, and then you'd come to 28. But now, of the 28, I want you to take note of the word king. Oh, first let me tell you a little secret. 28, remember 28, is a multiple of 7. Great. Multiple of 7. Now I want you to circle the word king, including Melch, for Melchizedek, just in this sandwich. So as we go along, let me start over again. The king of Sodom went out to meet him upon his return from the strike against Chedorlaomer, against the kings that were with him, to the valley of Shiva, that is the king's valley. Now Melch, king of Shalem, Jerusalem, brought out bread and wine, for he was priest of God Most High, and gave Abram blessing and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, founder or maker, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed by God Most High, who has delivered your oppressors into your hand. He, that's Abram, gave him 1/10 of everything from the battle. Then it goes on, because that was the middle section of our sandwich. This Melchizedek section, only 3 verses. That is the lunch meat. The king of Sodom's story started, but was interrupted by the Melchizedek story. Now we're going back to the king of Sodom's story. The king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons and the property, take for yourself. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I raised my hand in the presence of Yahweh, God Most High. Where did he learn that word? From Melchizedek, that name. But he now says that it's Yahweh who is God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. If from a thread to a sandal strap, if I should take from anything that is yours, so that you should not say, I made Abram rich, nothing for me, only what the lads have consumed or eaten, and the share of the men who went with me, Aner, Askarel, and Mamre, let them take their share, not for me. Did you count the number of kings? 7. 28 times king was in the whole story, and now it's 7 times in this part of the story. And we're so close. We're only 14 chapters away, 13 chapters away from chapter 1, where we saw God do the creative work in 7 days, right? So sevens have played an important part in Genesis so far. So we have 7 times king is mentioned here. And that's fun to see, isn't it? So we have our sandwich, and now we can leave our sandwich for a time, because now you see how the sandwich fits in with the rest of the chapter. And I bet some of you grandmoms could tell this story to your grandchildren now that we've gone over it so many times, and tell them, we don't have to be afraid of anything. Our God is in control. He is greater than any king or any leader or any country, and we can depend on him. Okay? So, let's go on to the next part. And that is the 2 columns with Hebrews 7, 1-3, and Genesis 14, 17-24. Now, this is where Hebrews gets to the story from Genesis and extracts the most important items and then adds to it. It is the most important part of the Melchizedek story. So what I want you to do is this. I want you to pause, and then I want you to take colored pencils if you have them. But if you don't have them, that's okay, because what you'll do is draw lines. And you'll draw lines between the words that are the same in the left-hand column and the words that are the same in the right-hand column. So let me give you an example. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, Melchizedek, king of Salem, in the left-hand column. In the right-hand column, in verse 18, it says the same thing. Melchizedek, king of Salem. So you would say color it. I've got it colored purple, but you can color it yellow, both of them. Or if you don't have colored pencils, which I would recommend if you're going to make your Bible your workbook, then you would draw a line between Melchizedek, king of Salem in the left and Melchizedek, king of Salem in the right. So then I want you to do that with all the things that are the same in both columns. So put it on pause, do that job, and then come back, okay? Because I have another job for you. Okay, so we're back, and you did it, right? You're all studiers, right? The only time I don't expect you to be doing the drawing the lines is if you've already done it and you're listening to this YouTube video a second or third time, which some people do while they're washing dishes or folding clothes or sweeping the floor or whatever. They're getting it a second time, not the first time, because we want you to work with the Word. We want you involved, and that's going to help you have the stamina and the strength to combat the awful thoughts of what is going on today. We don't have to think about those things because God's Word tells us to take every thought into captivity. How do we do that? By replacing thoughts. At first, when you first learn, and this happened to me, first learning how to take my thoughts into captivity and place them on something that was godly was really hard because my mind kept on slipping back to the fearful things. I know it happened to me, but with practice, you build muscles, spiritual muscles, so that every time your mind slips back to the awful things, you say, not going there. I have other things to think about. And you better have other things to think about. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to stop thinking about the bad things. So you need to be in the Word, memorizing the Word, whatever, studying the Word, thinking about it how it can apply to your life, thinking about why did this happen? Why was this word repeated? Keep on thinking. You will train yourself. It took me a long time, but I can do that now and easily. As soon as my mind slips to what the news has just said, which I don't listen to very much, um, I it's gone where it needs to go, on the Lord. So that's what I want you to do, is to study this along with your Bible next to you, so that you are getting your mind in tune with the Word, grappling with the Word, and learning about our God. Paul prays that for his beloved people, and he says that, Lord, I want them to know you. And how are we going to know him without being in the Word? We can't get to know him well unless we're thinking about the Word. How can I know what God is like and who he is? How can I know his will unless I'm in his Word? Okay, so let's look at the things that you used to color. Um, it says, okay, the next thing is priest of the Most High God. Well, we saw that 1, 2, 3 times in the right hand column. We saw it in verse 18, in verse 19, in verse 20. We're told that Yahweh is God Most High by Melchizedek. And then it tells us that Abram, as he was returning from the slaughter of the kings, and in Genesis 14, I have in parentheses because I put this in, but it tells us in Genesis 14, after Abram's return from the defeat of the kings of the east. Okay, so then slaughter of the kings, and blessed him. Melchizedek blesses Abram. And then on the right, in verse 19, it says, he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram. Okay? And then it tells us on the left, Abraham apportioned a tenth part of all the spoils. And it says that again at the end of verse 20 on the right, Abram gave him a tenth of all. And of course it says King of Salem again in verse, can't see, it's right in the middle, which means King of Peace. Names mean something in the Hebrew, and Melchizedek, Melch for king, remember that? Zedek for righteousness. He's king of righteousness. And then he's king of Salem, which means peace. So Melchizedek, or king of righteousness, is king of Salem, which is Jerusalem. Okay, so you got the ones that are the same in both of those columns. I hope you got them all. If not, I helped you with it, right? Then there are words that are not in the right-hand column. And what's interesting is we wonder, how did the author of Hebrews come up with these things? So let's look at what isn't there. After Abraham apportioned a tenth part of the spoils, it says this, was first of all by translation of his name, King of Righteousness. Well, Melchizedek means King of Righteousness, that's right. And then also King of Salem, which is King of Peace. Now watch this. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he remains a priest continuously. Now, I had a picture, but the picture is in the other room. Would you mind if I go get it because it's an important element of what we're doing? I think I left it in the other room. I did. I'll be right back, okay? Back. I'm back. Thank you for waiting. I'm sorry. I thought I had brought it with me, but when I looked over, it wasn't there. So I want to show you a picture. Oh, man. And it's a picture of, oh, wait till you see. I love this picture. No, it's not there. It's not there. Here it is. Okay. So, here it is. Let's see if you can see it. There we go. This is 12 years ago. Yes, it is. There I am standing with my granddaughter, Izzy. She's 13 now. And she's probably about a year old right there. This is one of my favorite pictures. Now, I'm going to use this picture for something special. So you're probably not going to figure this out. Or maybe you've been with me years ago. I did Hebrews and shared this with my group. So either you might not remember or you weren't with me. So there's a picture of me. I want you to zero in on me right here because that's the best thing. Okay, according to this picture, now let's zero in on Izzy. There's Izzy. According to this picture, does Izzy have a mother or father? Now I know she does, but according to this picture that we see here, does she have a mother or father? No, because the picture doesn't contain her mother or father. You have to go outside this picture in order to realize that she has a mother and father. But according to the picture, she doesn't. According to this picture, does she have a birth or death? Well, you have to go outside the picture to realize, yes, she has a birth certificate and she will have a death certificate. But you have to go outside the picture to figure that out. According to the picture, is there a genealogical list there? No. Now, there is a genealogical list. She has parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and but not according to this picture. Got that? Okay, you're wondering what I'm talking about, aren't you? Well, I'm talking about the way the author of Hebrews sees this story here in Genesis. He draws a picture for you from Genesis 14, 17 to 24. So I want you to take a plain piece of paper. Just a plain, it couldn't be small, big. And using stick figures, I want you to draw the picture of Melchizedek, these 3 verses. Okay? So just use, nobody's going to see it. You're just drawing a picture. I want you to draw a picture of Melchizedek and put a crown on his head because he's a king. Just a stick picture. Carrying, maybe you can even put a platter out. What is he carrying? He's probably carrying a skin of wine, much more exorbitant than what was necessary if you were to have people at your house in those days, or you would just present bread and water. So Melchizedek is being exorbitant by bringing the wine and some bread, some homemade bread. Okay, he brings wine and bread, doesn't he? And so put it on a platter if you want, just to make it more modern for you. And then draw a stick figure of Abram, maybe with his hands outreached, or maybe with the booty ready to give to the king of Salem. So if you need time, put this on pause again, and then come back and have that picture in your mind. Okay, so pause and come back. Okay, so you have your picture there. Here's what I want you to. I want you to ask yourself these questions. According to this picture, does Melchizedek have a mother and a father? Well, no, they're not there, are they, in the picture? So now outside the picture, yes, but not in the picture as presented in Genesis. According to this picture, did he have a birth? Will he have a death? Not according to the picture. You have to go outside the picture in order to get a birth and a death and a mother and a father and a genealogy, don't you? In fact, according to this picture, Melchizedek, who is not only a king but a priest, he's a priest going continuously, keeps on going, according to the picture. Got that? That is what the author of Hebrews sees. Now, the backdrop of that is that in Genesis, everybody who's important gets a mother, a father, a birth, a death, a genealogy. Everybody who's important. Even Cain gets a genealogy. I mean, and Abraham gets one. Isaac and Jacob and all the way through Scripture. Everybody who's important gets a genealogy. But this king gets no genealogy. We're told in the genealogies of chapter 5, chapter 10, chapter 11, and so going at chapter 12. In all the genealogies, we're told the mother and we're told the father, at least, of everybody. And when he was born, in the 650th year of so-and-so was born. Remember that in all the genealogies? And then we're told, and he died, right? They all get it. All the important people. Now, who's Melchizedek? Well, our author is going to show us that Melchizedek was greater than Jesus. Greater than Abraham. That was a mistake. He's not greater than Jesus. Jesus is greater than he is, as you will see. But he's greater than Abraham. How do we know? Well, our author of Hebrews has told us that Abraham, and Genesis tells us, that Abraham gave tithes to Melchizedek. So he must have been greater. Not only that, but Melchizedek blesses Abraham. And our author's going to tell us that's well known that the greater blesses the lesser. So on two counts, Melchizedek is greater than Abraham, who gets a mother, a father, a genealogy, a birth, a death. But Melchizedek, according to this picture, gets none of that. So he looks like the Son of God. Isn't that interesting? Who really has no mother, father, genealogy, and he is a priest. He remains a priest forever, not just continuously in the picture, but forever and ever. So, do you see what the author is trying to get across? He's trying to tell us that in this picture, which doesn't give Melchizedek any of those important things that we've listed. In that picture, Melchizedek is, for the author of Hebrews, for us, a picture, a type of Christ, the Son of God. Now, of course, Jesus has a genealogy and a birth and a death, but that's Jesus, the incarnated Jesus. But notice the author of Hebrews doesn't call Jesus Jesus in this section. He calls him Son of God. And then remember, Son was used of Jesus in the whole first chapter and a half of Hebrews. He doesn't get named Jesus until the halfway through this second chapter, when the author is telling us about the incarnation of Jesus. In the first part of Hebrews, the first chapter and a half, he's the Son because he is shown to be God himself. And as the Son of God, he has no genealogy. He has no birth, no death, no mother, no father at all. And Melchizedek pictures this. He's a type in the picture. Right? So, Melchizedek really did, outside the picture, have a mother and a father, a birth, a death, a genealogy. So literally, that means according to the story, Melchizedek has no mother or father, according to the story. No birth announcement or death certificate, according to the story. Has no genealogy, according to this story. Has no beginning of days nor end of life, according to this story. But the historical picture of Melchizedek, outside the picture, we know that he has a mother and a father, has a birth announcement, a death certificate, has a genealogy, has the beginning of days and end of life. But what is said about Melchizedek is as important to the author of Hebrews as what is said. These things aren't said, aren't brought out in the picture the author of Genesis, Moses, gives to us about Abram and Melchizedek. That's all we have. So according to that picture, we have to go outside the picture to realize that Melchizedek. And remember, it says later on in all the scripture that Jesus, unlike Melchizedek's, the reality is our forever high priest. And Melchizedek is only continuous inside the picture that the author has given us of Melchizedek. And that's what the writer of Hebrews uses to show that Jesus is greater even than Melchizedek. Who is greater than Abraham? Melchizedek is only a type, and the type is shown through the picture that is given to us. And it's a purposeful picture, says the author of Hebrews. He's shown to be this way purposefully by the Lord through the Word. Well, we will go over this again next week in a different way so that you get this. Because if you've never heard this before, you say to yourself, huh? But this is Hebrew thinking. This is, Hebrews was written 2,000 years ago. The story of Melchizedek was written 3,500 years ago when Moses was in the desert. It happened years and years before, hundreds of years before. Of course, their thinking is different from ours. It is. We have to go back into the thinking of that time to understand what they're trying to get across. So if you need to hear this again, I would uh, suggest that you do it while you're washing dishes tonight, okay? Or making the bed tomorrow, or any one of those boring jobs where it's so neat to have something to think about as you're doing it. Well, goodbye and God bless you till next week, and I'm praying for you. Bye bye.